The cracked leather ledger smelled of mildew and gin. I held it against my chest the way a child holds a stuffed animal, not for comfort, but because no one had told me to put it down, and I had long since stopped making decisions that weren't instructions. The lobby of Crane Syndicate headquarters was all black marble and silence, 40 floors of silence above me, 2 security guards flanking me, my father's signature drawing on a contract I hadn't been permitted to read, transferring me like inventory from one column to another. I was 24 years old. I weighed 118 pounds. I was wearing a dress my father had chosen because it made me look docile, and flats because heels would have made me taller than the man he'd sent to deliver me, a lawyer named Polk, who kept checking his watch as though my life were an appointment running long. Marin Ashby, Polk announced to the front desk, pursuant to the Ashby-Crane Debt Resolution Agreement, Section 14, subsection, "We know who she is," the receptionist said. 14 people in that lobby. I counted them because counting was the only language I trusted. 14 people who watched an Omega be walked to an elevator by 2 guards and a sweating attorney, carrying nothing but a dead man's account book and whatever dignity could survive being called a debt resolution. The elevator doors opened. The scent hit me first. Dark amber, rain-wet stone. Not perfume, not cologne. Something underneath, glandular, deep. The kind of scent that doesn't ask permission to be noticed. It filled the elevator car the way weather fills a valley. I stepped in before I registered who was already standing there. She hadn't turned around yet. Tall, still, a phone pressed to her ear, her voice so low it registered more as vibration than sound. Black suit. Black hair cut just above the collar. When the doors closed and the car began to climb, she stopped talking. I watched her shoulders shift, a single inhale, held. She turned. I have replayed that moment more times than I should admit. The Obsidian Queen, the financial press called her. Vesper Crane, CEO of a conglomerate that had swallowed 6 competitors in 3 years without a single hostile headline. She destroyed people the way erosion destroys cliffs, slowly, completely, without raising her voice. Her eyes were dark gray, almost black. She looked at Polk, then at the guards, then at me, not my face, but the ledger in my arms, and something moved behind her expression. Not surprise. Recognition, leave us, she said. To everyone. Polk began to stammer about transfer protocols. Now, they left at the next floor. The doors closed again. 23 floors to go. Vesper Crane looked at me the way you'd look at a lock you hadn't expected to find on a door you owned. Assessing, patient. Not cruel, but not kind either, something more dangerous than either. Curious, you're the asset, she said. I should have been afraid. I was afraid, underneath everything, in the animal part of my brain that recognized an apex predator when it shared an enclosed space with one. But I had spent 6 years doing my father's books while he drank, 6 years finding the decimal points he'd missed and the invoices he'd fabricated, and fear had stopped being something I reacted to. It was just the weather I lived in. I'm Marin, I said. I know what your name is. Then use it. The elevator climbed. Her scent thickened, amber darkening, stone after a longer rain. I watched her jaw tighten. A micro-expression. The kind of thing I'd learned to read the way other people read moods, by the numbers, by the tension ratios, by what the body confesses when the face won't. She didn't use my name. The doors opened on the 40th floor, and Vesper Crane walked out without looking back. I followed because the alternative was standing in an elevator until someone decided what to do with me, and I had spent my whole life being decided about. I wanted at least to see the room where they planned to keep me. It was an office, glass walls, a city visible in every direction. "You'll be assigned work," Vesper said, her back to me. "Something appropriate." "Appropriate for what?" "For your situation." My situation. I tasted the word. My situation was that my father, Cass Ashby, had borrowed $2.7 million from the Crane Syndicate over a period of 4 years, using increasingly creative collateral, property he didn't own, contracts he couldn't fulfill, and finally, when every other fiction had been exhausted, his unmarried Omega daughter. I knew because I'd found the paperwork in his desk 3 weeks before Polk arrived. I'd read it twice. The numbers hadn't changed the second time. "My situation," I repeated, "is that I was sold." "You can say the word." Vesper turned, that gray gaze again. "Measuring, feeling," she said. "You'll start with filing." She pressed a button on her desk. A man appeared in the doorway, broad, unsmiling, with the bearing of someone who had been military before he'd been corporate. A beta. His name, I'd learn, was Dorian. "Show the asset to the 7th floor," Vesper said. "Set her up." Dorian looked at me the way one looks at a stray that's wandered into a restaurant. Not unkind, not anything. I followed him out. Behind me, I heard Vesper sit down. The creak of her chair. A single exhale, and then silence, the kind that fills a room when someone has just encountered something they didn't budget for. The 7th floor was operations. Gray carpet. Fluorescent lights that hummed at a frequency designed to slowly erode the human will to live. They gave me a desk in the corner, a stack of misfiled expense reports from the previous quarter, and instructions to sort them by date and department. I sorted them in 40 minutes. Then, I read them. This is the thing about me that my father never understood, that he dismissed as a parlor trick, that he actively punished because it made him feel observed. I can read a ledger the way other people read faces. Patterns emerge. Inconsistencies glow. Numbers tell me who's lying the way voice pitch tells other people, and I have never once been wrong. The Crane Syndicate's Q3 expense reports contained a discrepancy. Not a small one. Someone in the acquisitions division had been routing payments through a subsidiary that existed only on paper, a shell company registered in Delaware with no employees, no physical address, and a transaction volume of $4.2 million over 6 months. The money went in clean and came out allocated to consulting fees that no consultant had ever earned. I found it in the margins, in the rounding errors, in the way certain invoice numbers skipped in sequences that should have been continuous. The kind of thing an entire accounting team would miss because they were looking at the forest and I was looking at the rings inside the trees. I wrote it up. 3 pages. Longhand, because they hadn't given me a computer. I put it on Dorian's desk when he stepped out for coffee. He came back, read the first page standing up, read the second page sitting down. Didn't read the third page because he was already reaching for his phone. 40 minutes later, I was back on the 40th floor. Vesper Crane sat behind her desk with my 3 handwritten pages spread before her. Dorian stood by the door with his arms crossed and an expression I couldn't parse, not hostility anymore. Something adjacent to alarm. "Where did you train?" Vesper asked. I didn't. "You found a $4.2 million embezzlement in your first hour of filing. It was 40 minutes. Her scent shifted. Amber warming. I cataloged it without meaning to. Who taught you to read financials like this? Nobody taught me. I taught myself on my father's books. I held up the cracked leather ledger, still in my arms, still smelling of mildew and gin. He needed someone to fix his mistakes. I was available. Vesper studied me for a long moment. I watched her reassess, watched the categories shift behind her eyes. Asset, inconvenience, debt payment. Something else. "Dorian," she said. Move her upstairs. Give her an office. A real one. Dorian's eyebrows rose a fraction. An office. With a door. I was led to the 38th floor. A corner office with real walls, a window overlooking the east side of the city, and a desk that was larger than the bed I'd slept in at my father's house. Dorian lingered in the doorway. Don't make her regret this, he said. Regret what? Paying a fair price? His mouth twitched, not a smile. The ghost of one, killed before it could live. He left. I sat in my new office. Alone, I set the cracked ledger on the desk and opened it to the last page my father had written in, the page where my name appeared in his handwriting next to a dollar amount, next to a date. Transferred, the column header said. Not sold. Transferred. I closed the book and called Petra. She picked up on the first ring. Tell me you're not dead. I'm not dead. Tell me you're not in a basement. I'm in a corner office on the 38th floor of the Crane Syndicate building. Silence. Then, Marin, what the hell? I told her. All of it. The elevator, the scent, the filing, the fraud I'd found, the office with a door. Petra listened the way she always listened, like a jury foreman waiting for the one detail that would change her verdict. She called you the asset, Petra said. Yes, and you corrected her. Yes, good, do it again every time. Do it until she chokes on your actual name. I almost smiled. Almost smiling was a habit I'd broken around the same time I'd stopped taking sugar in my coffee, somewhere in the long gray middle of my father's house, when allowing myself sweetness started to feel like leaving a door unlocked. I took my coffee black now. Had for years. The first week was a negotiation neither of us named. Vesper assigned me to a full audit of the acquisitions division. I found 2 more irregularities, smaller, but connected to the first. She read my reports at the end of each day. We developed a rhythm. I'd leave the pages on her desk. She'd summon me the next morning to discuss them. We never sat close. We never touched. The office was large enough to maintain distance, and we both maintained it. But scent doesn't care about distance. I'd catch hers in the hallway, that dark amber signature trailing behind her like a rumor. In the elevator, it was inescapable. Twice I stepped in to find the car empty, but her scent still hanging in the air, and my body responded before my mind could intervene. A warming in my chest, a loosening at the base of my skull. The involuntary lean towards something that smelled of safety, which was absurd, because nothing about Vesper Crane was safe. She caught mine too. I knew because I watched her nostrils flare in meetings when I entered late. Because her hand would find her own neck, her scent gland, and press, as though holding something down. Because on the morning I wore a sweater I'd slept in, saturated with warm vanilla and sun-dried linen, she ended our briefing 4 minutes early and didn't give a reason. On the 8th day, I came into my office to find the fluorescent overhead replaced with a warm-toned desk lamp. I hadn't remembered mentioning the lights. I'd said it once, in passing, to Dorian, that the fluorescence hurt my eyes. Dorian, who reported everything to Vesper. Next to the lamp, a French press. A bag of dark roast. No sugar. No note. I set up the French press, poured the coffee black, sat at my desk and opened the next quarter's reports and began to hum, a habit I'd had since childhood. A low, tuneless sound I made when the numbers were talking to me and I needed to listen. That evening, Vesper called me to her office. Sit, she said. I sat. The chair across from her desk was leather. Expensive, it smelled faintly of her. I'm going to tell you something, Vesper said, and I want you to hear all of it before you respond. I waited. Your father's debt to the Crane Syndicate was not brokered by me. It was brokered by my father, Eldon Crane, 6 years ago. The terms were his. The collateral escalations were his. He died 2 years ago, and I inherited the portfolio, including your father's account. She paused. Her hands were flat on the desk. Still, I did not know, until 3 weeks ago, that the final collateral listed on the Ashby account was a person. When I found out, I had 2 options: void the contract and release you to a father who had already demonstrated his willingness to sell you, or accept the transfer and bring you here where I could control the conditions. I sat with that. The leather chair creaked. You chose the cage with better lighting, I said. I chose the option where you survived. You don't know what I would have survived. I know what your father is. That landed. It landed because it was true, and because she said it without softness, without pity, with the flat certainty of someone reading a balance sheet. Cass Ashby was a failed businessman, a compulsive debtor, a man who had looked at his daughter and seen not a person, but an entry in a ledger that could be moved from one column to another. She was right about what he was. That didn't make the cage a kindness. I want you here because you're useful, Vesper continued. The embezzlement you found saved this company millions. I want you to finish the audit. I want your analysis of every division. And I want to know what else is in that ledger you carry everywhere. My father's sins, I said. In his own handwriting, her jaw tightened, that micro-expression again, the one I was beginning to catalog. Not anger, something closer to hunger. The kind of want that lives in the chest and doesn't have a name. You were never supposed to be collateral, she said. Low, almost to herself. I wanted, more than I'd wanted anything in years, for someone to have said that sooner, for someone to have said it when I was 18, and presenting Omega in my father's bathroom while he shouted through the door about how much my suppressants were going to cost. For someone to have said it when I was 21 and he made me cancel my university enrollment because he needed me home to manage his accounts. For someone to have said it any of the 1,000 times I sat at his kitchen table with that cracked leather ledger and turned his chaos into order while he drank in the next room and never once said thank you. But no one had. Until now. Finish the audit, Vesper said. Her voice had recovered its authority. The moment closed. Dorian will give you full access. I stood, walked to the door. Marin, I turned. She was looking at the window, not at me. Her reflection in the glass was sharper than her face. The lamp. Was the color temperature right? Something in my chest turned over. Not warmth, not yet. The possibility of warmth. The pilot light. It was right, I said. I left. The weeks that followed were the strangest of my life. I audited the Crane Syndicate top to bottom. Every division, every subsidiary, every line of revenue and expense, and I found them. The small infections, the inflated contracts, the loyalty purchases disguised as consulting fees. Vesper read every report. She acted on every finding. People were fired, contracts voided, divisions restructured. The Obsidian Queen cleaned house, and I was the one holding the broom. Dorian warmed to me in increments so small they were almost invisible. He brought me coffee once, black, without comment. He started nodding when we passed in the hallway. One afternoon, when I was buried in subsidiary filings and hadn't eaten since morning, he set a sandwich on my desk and said, "Eat. She'll kill me if you collapse." I noticed things. The way Vesper's schedule shifted. Meetings that used to run until 7 now ended at 5:30, the time I usually started my evening review, humming at my desk. The way she'd find reasons to walk past the 38th floor. Not stopping, not speaking, just passing close enough for her scent to reach me through my open door. Dark amber. Rain-wet stone. It was becoming familiar, It was becoming something I reached for without meaning to, the way your hand reaches for a railing in the dark. She never touched me. Not once. Not a handshake, not a guiding hand at the small of my back, not any of the casual contacts that alphas use to stake territorial claims. The absence was so deliberate, it became its own kind of statement. One night I stayed late, past midnight. The building was empty, except for security. I was deep in the acquisitions data, humming, my coffee cold, when I heard the elevator open on my floor. Her scent arrived before she did. Vesper stood in my doorway. Her jacket was off, her sleeves were rolled. She looked more human without her armor, younger, less carved from obsidian, and more carved from something that could bruise. "You should sleep," she said. "I'm close to something. You've been humming for 3 hours." I looked up. "How do you know that?" She didn't answer. She looked at my desk, the papers, the cold coffee, the cracked ledger sitting in the corner where I kept it always. Her scent shifted. Warm, heavy, the amber going almost golden. "Go to bed, Marin." It was the first time she'd used my name. The security breach happened on a Tuesday. I was in my office when the alarms triggered, sharp, repeating, the kind of sound designed to override every other thought. The building went into lockdown. Steel shutters descended over the windows. The elevators froze. My door locked from the outside. Dorian's voice came over the intercom. A server breach, possible physical intrusion, all personnel to shelter in place. I sheltered. I waited. I listened to the alarm cycle and tried to work, but the fluorescent overheads had kicked on as part of the emergency protocol, and my desk lamp was useless against them. My head began to pound. 20 minutes in, my door opened. Vesper, she looked wrong. Not injured, not afraid. Something underneath those things, a vibration in her body, a heat in her scent, that I recognized with the deep instinctual knowledge that omegas carry in their blood. Her suppressants were failing. The stress, the adrenaline, the lockdown, something had cracked the chemical dam, and her rut was bleeding through. Her scent filled my office in seconds, not rain-wet stone now. Thunder, lightning, the petrichor after a storm that hasn't finished. My body responded before my mind could catch it, a flush climbing my chest, a slackening in my muscles, the omega's involuntary answer to an alpha in need. Vesper gripped the doorframe. Her knuckles were white. "The breach is contained," she said. Her voice was controlled, barely, but the lockdown will hold for another 2 hours minimum. "I came to check." She stopped. Inhaled, her eyes darkened. "Your scent. I know. I know." She pressed her forehead to the doorframe. I watched the war in her body, discipline against biology, control against the rut rising in her like a tide. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't wanted this, and she was fighting it with everything she had, because she understood, in a way my father never had, that my body's response did not constitute my consent. "Leave now," Vesper said, "if you're going to leave." The door was open. The hallway was dark, but passable. I could walk out, find another room, lock myself in, wait out the lockdown at a safe distance while her rut crested and broke without me. She was giving me the exit. She was giving me the choice no one had ever given me. I didn't move. "I'm staying," I said. "Marin, I'm staying. Sit down." She sat. On the floor, her back against the wall, her hands pressed flat to the carpet. I sat across from her, not touching, close enough to let my scent reach her, the vanilla, the linen, the warmth that I could feel pouring off me now in waves. She breathed it in. Her shoulders dropped. The trembling eased by degrees. We sat like that for 2 hours. Not touching. not speaking. Just breathing in the same room while the lockdown held and her rut rolled through her, and my scent did what I let it do. Anchor her. When the alarm stopped and the shutters rose, Vesper stood. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not the assessing gaze, not the measured authority. Something raw. "Stripped, thank you," she said. "Don't," I said. "Don't thank me like I did you a favor. I stayed because I wanted to stay." She left. The amber lingered for hours. I sat at my desk and pressed my hands flat to the surface and felt the aftershock of something that had shifted between us, a door opening where a wall had been. 2 days later, Vesper knocked on my office door at the end of the day. She was carrying 2 mugs. She sat in the chair across from my desk, the one no one else ever used, and set 1 mug in front of me. Black coffee, the right temperature. "Tell me about the ledger," she said. I told her. Not the numbers. She knew the numbers. I told her about the kitchen table, the gin bottles, the sound of my father's breathing when he fell asleep over his accounts, and I'd take the pen from his hand and correct his arithmetic. I told her about the day I found my name in the book. Column header, transferable assets. My name, a dollar amount. Vesper listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't perform sympathy. She held her mug with both hands and listened the way she read reports, completely, retaining everything. Then she told me about Eldon Crane, her father. The man who built the syndicate and taught his only alpha daughter that love was leverage, that you never showed want because want was a handle others could grip. He'd bonded her mother as a business arrangement. When her mother left, he'd said good, one less variable. Vesper was 14. She presented alpha at 15. Her father began training her the next day. He'd have liked the ledger, Vesper said, the neatness of it, a person reduced to an entry. "You're not him." Some days I'm not sure. I reached across the desk, not for her hand, for her sleeve, the cuff, the fabric. I touched it, held it between 2 fingers, the smallest possible contact. Her scent bloomed, golden amber, warm stone, not rain wet, sun warmed. "You're not him," I said again. She looked at where my fingers held her cuff. She didn't pull away. That was the night I found the book on my pillow, a battered paperback, a novel I'd mentioned once in passing 3 weeks earlier, a story from my childhood that my father had thrown away when he decided fiction was a waste of time, and I should be spending my evenings on his real numbers. I'd mentioned it to Petra on the phone. I hadn't known anyone else was listening. I held it. I pressed it to my chest. I cried in a way I hadn't cried in years, not from sadness, but from the specific pain of being seen by someone who was paying attention. The headline hit on a Thursday. Cranes bought Omega, inside the contract that sold a woman to the Obsidian Queen. The article was thorough. Someone had leaked the transfer document, every page, every signature, every clause that reduced me to collateral. The byline was unfamiliar, but the source quotes were poison elegant, and I recognized the syntax before I recognized the name. Sylvain Aurel, Vesper's ex-fiancé. The woman who had been positioned to bond Vesper before the engagement dissolved 2 years ago, officially by mutual agreement, unofficially because Vesper had found Sylvain's affection to be as strategic as her father's doctrine. The comment section was worse than the article. The think pieces were worse than the comments. Within 6 hours, my name was public, my photograph, my designation. My father's name. My father gave an interview by noon. She was always going to cost me more than she was worth, Cass Ashby told the camera, with the bloated sincerity of a man who has confused confession with absolution. I did what any businessman would do. I cut my losses. I watched it on my phone. In my office, with the door locked and the desk lamp on and my coffee going cold. Dorian called. "Vesper wants you upstairs. Tell Vesper I'll come when I'm ready." Silence, then gruffly, "Are you all right?" "No, do you need anything? I need everyone to stop reading about me." He hung up. I sat with it. The humiliation, the specific quality of being exposed, not nude but narrated, my worst moment turned into content for strangers who would have an opinion by lunch and forget me by dinner. I thought about what Sylvain wanted, which was not to hurt me, but to remove me. I was an obstacle. Not to Vesper's heart, which Sylvain had never wanted, but to Vesper's utility. Sylvain collected powerful alphas the way other people collected art, and she had not forgiven the one that got away. And my father, who had sold me, was now selling the story of selling me. Monetizing it. He had found one more way to convert his daughter into currency. I called Petra. "I've seen it," Petra said. "All of it. I need you to listen to me." "I'm listening. Don't you dare let them make you small. Don't you dare. You are the woman who found a $4.2 million fraud in 40 minutes. You are not a headline. I'm sitting in an office that was given to me by the woman who bought me. She didn't buy you. She caught you. There's a difference, and you know it. I knew it. That was the worst part. I knew the difference, and I was choosing not to feel it, because feeling it meant trusting Vesper Crane, and trust was a currency I'd been bankrupt in for years. I left that night, not dramatically, not with a speech. I waited until the building was quiet, took the cracked leather ledger from my desk, and walked out the front door. The night security guard watched me go. He didn't stop me. I wasn't a prisoner. I had never been a prisoner. That was the thing that made it hurt. Petra's apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up with a fire escape that faced east. I sat on the iron grating at 3 a.m. with the ledger in my lap and a cigarette between my fingers that I didn't light. The city hummed below me, distant, indifferent. I opened the ledger to the page with my name and looked at my father's handwriting, the shaky cursive, the dollar amount, the word transferred, and I thought about burning it. Not yet, because here is what no one knew, what I hadn't told Vesper, what I'd been compiling quietly in the margins of my audit work for weeks. My father's original debt to the Crane Syndicate was a fiction. The $2.7 million that justified my transfer, the foundational debt, the reason for everything, was built on falsified contracts, forged signatures, phantom transactions. My father hadn't just sold me. He'd invented the debt that made the sale possible. He'd created the liability and then offered me as the asset to cover a hole that had never existed. The debt wasn't real. It had never been real. I was never legally collateral because the collateral requirement itself was born from fraud. I had the proof. 47 pages of it. Cross-referenced, source documented. Airtight, I'd compiled it on my own time, in my own hand, in the back pages of a spare notebook I'd kept locked in my desk. I hadn't shown it to Vesper because I hadn't been ready to face what it meant, that my father's cruelty wasn't even efficient. It was built on a lie elaborate enough to need my silence to survive. I sat on the fire escape until dawn. Then I went inside, took a shower, borrowed Petra's least aggressive sweater, and called Dorian. "I need to see you," I said, "not Vesper." We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from Petra's. Dorian arrived in civilian clothes, less intimidating, more human, still radiating the specific energy of a man who could disable an attacker with a coffee stirrer. I slid the notebook across the table, he read. I watched his face change, the tight professionalism loosening, the skepticism giving way to something harder. Conviction. "This is real," he said. "Every line of it. Your father forged the original debt. the debt that justified selling me. Yes, Dorian closed the notebook. Looked at me. For the first time since I'd known him, his expression was fully readable. Fury, controlled, contained, military-grade fury, directed not at me but at the man who had built a prison out of arithmetic and locked his daughter inside it. She needs to see this, Dorian said. I know. Why didn't you show her before? Because I was afraid she'd look at me the way everyone had always looked at me, as a problem to be solved, a line item to be corrected. Because I was afraid the proof would make her pity me, and pity was just another cage with better lighting. Because I wanted to be the one who solved it. Because I was so tired of being saved. Because I had to leave first, I said. I had to know I could. Dorian studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Once, the nod of a man who understood what it cost to build your own door before you could choose to walk through someone else's. There's one more thing, I said. I told him about Sylvain. About the leak, about the precision of the timing. The article had dropped exactly 3 days after I'd flagged a series of irregular payments flowing from a Crane subsidiary to a holding company linked to Sylvain's family office. I was getting close to something she needed buried. The leak was designed not just to humiliate me, but to discredit my work. If I was Crane's bot Omega, nothing I found could be trusted. My credibility was the real target. Dorian's jaw set. Can you prove the connection? I can prove she made a phone call to the journalist 40 minutes after I submitted my report on her family's holding company. I can prove the transfer document was accessed from a terminal registered to Sylvain's assistant. I pulled out my phone, and I can prove this. A recording. Sylvain's voice, captured by the Crane Syndicate's own conference room audio system during a meeting she clearly hadn't known was being logged. Her voice, silk and venom and studied patience, explaining to an unseen associate exactly how she planned to eliminate me and reclaim her place at Vesper's side. She leaked it to suppress my fraud discovery, Sylvain said on the recording. The Omega found something she shouldn't have. I simply made sure no one would believe her. Dorian took my phone, listened to the recording twice, set it down, get dressed in something with pockets, he said. It's going to be a long day. The board meeting was at 2:00. Full board. 14 members, Vesper at the head of the table in full obsidian armor, the black suit, the black expression, the scent locked so tightly the room smelled of nothing. She hadn't spoken to me since I'd left. She'd called once. I hadn't answered. She'd sent a text, 2 words, no punctuation, come back. I hadn't replied. Now I walked into the boardroom behind Dorian, carrying my notebook and my phone and the cracked leather ledger I'd been holding since the day I arrived. Vesper's eyes found me immediately. Her scent broke through her control for one instant. Amber, warm, flooded with something I could only call relief, before she locked it back down. Ms. Ashby has evidence relevant to multiple ongoing matters, Dorian announced, including the source of last week's press leak and the integrity of the Ashby-Crane debt resolution agreement. I presented my case. 47 pages. Every forged signature, every phantom transaction, every fabricated invoice that Cass Ashby had used to build a debt that didn't exist so he could sell a daughter he'd stopped seeing as a person somewhere around the time she stopped being small enough to ignore. The board listened. Vesper watched. I didn't look at her because looking at her would have broken something in my chest that I needed to hold together for 11 more minutes. Then Dorian played the recording. Sylvain's voice filled the boardroom. 14 board members heard her admit to orchestrating the leak, heard her describe me as an obstacle to be removed, heard her laugh, A small, cultured laugh, the kind that had probably charmed rooms full of people before this one, about how easy it had been to weaponize a souled Omega's shame. The silence after the recording ended was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Sylvain, who was not in the room but would learn of this within the hour, lost her advisory positions on 3 corporate boards by end of day. Her family's holding company faced a formal audit. Her social architecture, built over a decade of careful positioning, collapsed in a single news cycle, not because Vesper destroyed it, but because I had handed Vesper the truth, and Vesper had pointed it at the right wall. "The Ashby debt is void," Vesper said to the board. Her voice carried no triumph, no satisfaction, just the flat authority of someone stating a number. The original contract was fraudulent. The transfer agreement is unenforceable. "Miss, Ashby's presence here has been, from the beginning, voluntary," she looked at me then. "It will always be voluntary," she said. After the board cleared, after Dorian made calls, and lawyers made calls, and somewhere in the city Cass Ashby received a visit from financial crimes investigators who had been waiting for exactly this kind of documentation, after all of it, Vesper and I stood alone in the boardroom. The glass walls showed the city in every direction. The late afternoon light was gold. "You left," Vesper said. "I came back. You didn't answer my call. I wasn't ready. Are you ready now?" I looked at her, the Obsidian Queen, the woman who had inherited a doctrine that love was leverage and was standing in front of me, vibrating with the effort of not reaching for me, because she had learned, was learning, in real time, in the muscle and the bone, that love was not leverage. Love was a choice, and she was choosing to let me make mine. "You called me the asset," I said. "I know. I have a name. I know your name. Say it." Marin Low, her scent broke open, amber and rain-wet stone, and underneath it something new. Something that smelled like want without strategy. Marin, I stepped closer, not because her scent pulled me, because I walked. "I was never collateral," I said. Vesper's hand rose, stopped, hovered near my face without touching. "No," she said, "you never were. Then stop acting like you owe me." "What do I owe you?" "Nothing, that's the point. You owe me nothing. I owe you nothing." "Whatever this is," I gestured at the space between us, the charged air, the scent that had turned the boardroom into something intimate, "it starts at 0. She closed the distance. Her hand found my jaw, gentle, her thumb against my cheek, her scent everywhere. I leaned into her palm, and it was the first time in my life I had leaned toward anything without calculating the cost. "Can I?" "Yes," she kissed me. Not desperately, not like a claim, like a question she'd been holding in her mouth for weeks, finally allowed to land. I tasted amber. I tasted rain. I tasted the particular sweetness of someone who had been starving, choosing, for the first time, to eat. Dorian, I learned later, had been standing outside the boardroom door. He had turned his back. He had, according to the security footage Petra would eventually make me watch 3 times, smiled. The days after were reconstruction. Cass Ashby was arrested on 11 counts of financial fraud. The evidence was mine. The warrant was Vesper's. The satisfaction was complicated, not joy, but completion, the feeling of a column finally balancing after years of carrying a remainder that wouldn't resolve. Sylvain's fall was quieter but more total. 3 boards, 2 advisory positions, a social network that had been built on the assumption of her invulnerability collapsing when the assumption proved false. She did not go to prison. She went somewhere worse, irrelevance. Small city, smaller firm. Her name still attached to a scandal she could not outlive however far she moved from it. Vesper and I did not rush. We had earned the right to be slow. She asked before everything, before touching my hand, before sitting beside me on the couch in her apartment, before the night she found me humming at my desk at 9 p.m. and stood in the doorway for so long that I finally said, "You can come in." I scheduled my late work to hear that, she admitted. The humming. I rearranged 3 meetings. That's insane. Probably how long? Since the first week. I hummed for her, deliberately, watching her face soften in a way the financial press would never see, would never believe, would have called impossible in the woman they called the Obsidian Queen. The Obsidian Queen, undone by a tuneless sound made by a woman who had stopped humming in public years ago because her father said it was irritating. We built something. Not quickly. Not without friction. But honestly, the kind of honesty that comes from 2 people who have been lied to by everyone who was supposed to love them and have decided, together, to stop lying even when the truth is inconvenient and even when it costs something. One evening, 6 weeks after the boardroom, Vesper came to my office with a question in her scent and her hands in her pockets. She stood for a moment in the doorway where she'd stood during the rut, where she'd given me the exit she hoped I wouldn't take. "I want to claim you," she said. "I looked up from my reports. I want to bond with you. I want to mark you. I want everyone who ever looked at you and saw an entry in a ledger to see my mark on your throat and know that you chose it. That you chose me. That I am the luckiest alpha alive, and I did nothing to deserve it except, possibly, put in the correct lamp." The corner of my mouth lifted. Is that a proposal or a press release? "Marin, Vesper, will you let me?" I stood, walked to her, took her hands out of her pockets and held them. Her scent was shaking, the amber trembling at the edges, the stone cracking just slightly, everything she held together all day falling apart in the privacy of my doorway. "Yes," I said, with my words, with my name. Yes, she claimed me that night. In her apartment. The city dark outside the windows, her teeth on my scent gland and my hands in her hair, and the sound I made, not a hum, but something deeper, something that started in my chest and didn't stop. The bond settled into my blood the way warmth settles into cold hands, gradual, complete, irreversible. Through it I felt her, all of her, the parts she never showed anyone. The hunger and the grief and the relief so profound it was almost grief too. The relief of arriving somewhere you had stopped believing you'd find. Afterward, she held me, her nose pressed to the mark on my throat, her breath slowing. "My asset," she said. Quiet, different now. The word had changed entirely. It had started as a category and become an endearment, the way a wound becomes a scar, becomes a story you tell with your collar open. "You're Marin," I corrected. "My Marin." She proposed 3 months later. A small box. 1 knee. The living room of her apartment, which had become our apartment by the slow migration of my books and my coffee and my cracked leather ledger to the shelf beside her desk. Dorian was in the kitchen, pretending not to watch from the doorway, failing completely. He would deny it afterward with such conviction that Petra would call him a liar to his face, and he would not quite disagree. The ring was simple. A dark stone, obsidian, because Vesper had the self-awareness to find her own mythology funny when she was safe enough to be funny. I said yes before she finished asking. She laughed, which was the rarest sound in our world. I saved it the way I saved the book on my pillow. Petra, on the phone that night, went uncharacteristically quiet. "You're happy," she said. "Not a question." "I'm happy." "You sound different." "Different how? Like you've stopped bracing." I hadn't noticed until she named it. but the posture I'd carried since I was 18. The pulled-in shoulders, the held breath, the constant readiness for the next demand had loosened. Not disappeared. Softened. I stood differently. I breathed differently. I took up space I'd spent years trying not to occupy, and the world had not, as I had always feared, decided to take it back. The bond ceremony was small. 30 people. A garden, late afternoon light turning everything amber, the color I associated with home now, the color of her. Vesper wore black. I wore white. Petra stood beside me and cried with the spectacular lack of self-consciousness that was her best quality. Dorian stood beside Vesper and didn't cry, but his jaw did the thing where it tightened against an emotion too large for his face, and afterward he shook my hand and said, "In 15 years, I have never once seen her wait for anyone. She waited for you from the first day. Don't let her forget what that cost her." "She won't forget," I said. "No." He glanced at her across the garden, at Vesper Crane, who was watching me talk to Dorian with an expression she used to hide and now simply wore. "I don't think she will." At the reception, there was a fire pit. I'd requested it. Vesper hadn't asked why. She trusted that I had numbers for everything, including fire. I took the cracked leather ledger from the bag where I'd kept it since we arrived, my father's book, the record of his debts and his deceptions, and the page with my name next to a dollar amount and the word transferred. I held it over the fire. The leather was old. It would catch quickly. Vesper stood beside me. She didn't speak. She understood what I was doing, because she understood what it meant when you could finally afford to let go of the proof. I dropped it. The flames took it immediately. The pages curled, my father's handwriting disappearing letter by letter, number by number, the architecture of his lies burning down to ash, and the ash dispersing, and the dispersal being, finally, the end of it. Vesper took my hand. "I have something for you," she said. A ledger. New, leather the color of dark honey. Blank pages, every one of them. Hundreds of them, a whole future of unmarked columns. I opened the cover and found, in Vesper's handwriting, the precise, angular script I'd come to know from margin notes and report responses, and the 2-word text that had asked me to come back. 2 words, begin here. I closed the book, pressed it to my chest the way you hold the future when you've finally been given permission to have one. 6 months later, a morning. Our apartment, sunlight through the east windows, falling across the bed where Vesper slept with one arm extended across the space where I'd been. I stood in the kitchen making coffee. 2 cups, mine black, hers with cream. I paused, opened the cabinet above the French press, reached for the sugar bowl, dropped 1 cube into my cup and watched it dissolve. Sweetness, I was allowing it now. Just 1 cube. This morning. Just this. On the counter, the news played quietly on a tablet. Cass Ashby had been sentenced to 4 years for financial fraud. His public defender had argued for leniency. The judge, reading from my 47 pages of documentation, had not been persuaded. Somewhere in the city, Sylvain Aurel was reinventing herself in a smaller firm in a smaller city. The 3 board seats she'd lost still empty, her name still attached to a scandal she could not outlive however far she moved from it. Polk, the lawyer who had delivered me to a lobby and checked his watch while my life changed categories, had been disbarred. Petra had moved to a bigger apartment. She was happy. She called every Sunday and still, 6 months on, got a particular catch in her voice when she talked about the book on the pillow. Vesper appeared in the kitchen doorway. Hair undone, eyes soft with sleep, her scent, dark amber, rain-wet stone, filling the room the way morning fills a room, completely, without effort, as though it had always been there and the world before it was simply an error in the data. She looked at my coffee, at the dissolving sugar cube. "That's new," she said. "It's time." She crossed the kitchen, kissed my temple, pressed her nose to the bond mark on my throat, and breathed in the vanilla and sun-dried linen that she had once told me, very quietly against my hair, was the only scent in the world that could make her feel still. "My asset," she said, "against my skin. Your Marin. My Marin." The morning light settled around us, gold and ordinary, and ours. The honey-colored ledger sat on the living room shelf where the cracked one used to be, its cover catching the sun. "Begin here," it said. And we had. And we were. The extraordinary thing about being seen, truly seen, wholly seen, seen not as a line item or a liability or a transferable asset, but as a person standing in a kitchen with sugar dissolving in her coffee and her whole life ahead of her, is that it doesn't feel extraordinary at all. It feels like morning. It feels like the first honest number in a ledger full of lies. It feels like standing in your full height and discovering that the air has been holding you all along, patient and waiting, and all you ever had to do was stop bracing and let it. Some people are born visible. Others have to burn the book that made them small before they can stand in their full height. I burned mine. I stood, and the woman beside me, the one they called the Obsidian Queen, the one who had learned that love was not leverage, but a choice made daily in coffee cups and desk lamps and books left on pillows, she stood with me. Not behind, not in front. With, "You were never collateral. You were the most valuable thing in the room." Some of us just need someone with the right eyes to read it. The end.